They say wrestling builds character. They say it teaches discipline, grit, and strength. But here's the thing nobody tells you sometimes. It breaks you before it builds you. For amateur wrestlers, it's not just about stepping on the mat and showing off technique. It's a battle against your own body, your mind, your weight, and sometimes the crushing feeling that the world doesn't care about all that pain you're putting in. It's the sport where legends are forged in silence, and nobody claps for the hours spent bleeding on those sweat-stained mats. It sucks to be a wrestler, and this is why. Let's start with the morning weigh-ins. If you've never been in a wrestling locker room on tournament day, imagine this: a group of teenage kids or young adults in trash bags, jogging in place, spinning into bottles, wrapped in hoodies even in 90-degree weather, because every ounce counts. Every calorie is guilt. Weight cutting isn't a trend, it's a survival tactic. These athletes push their bodies to extremes that would terrify the average gym goer, all to make weight for a 7-minute match. That match could go either way, but the suffering to get there is guaranteed. This isn't just discipline. This is obsession. This is the kind of mindset that has kids eating a single granola bar for the day, then grinding through to practice sessions. Wrestling culture glorifies toughness. Coaches will tell you stories about guys running stairs with trash bags taped around their bodies, or starving themselves for days to get into the right weight class. The brutal truth: this is normalized, and even now, in 2025, with mental health in sports finally being talked about, wrestling often feels left behind. Because wrestling isn't glamorous, it's not trending like basketball trick shots on TikTok, or getting featured on ESPN highlights for flashy dunks. Wrestling lives in high school gyms that smell like bleach and rubber mats. It thrives in tournaments where parents fill the stands, not reporters. For wrestlers, social media doesn't reward the grind, it barely notices it. But the grind is relentless. 2-a-days in the wrestling room, conditioning workouts, early morning lifts. The mat is a battlefield where one mistake means your opponent pins you to the floor. Your entire week of suffering feels like it was for nothing. And yet, wrestlers keep showing up. Talk to any amateur wrestler, and you'll hear the same thing: "That's the hardest thing I've ever done." That's not hyperbole. Wrestling is ranked among the toughest sports in the world for a reason. There's no teammate to pass the ball to, no one to cover your mistakes. It's you and your opponent, locked in a fight that tests every muscle, every ounce of stamina, and every shred of willpower you have. There's nowhere to hide on the mat. No excuses. It's raw competition in its purest form. But there's a cost. The emotional toll is something we don't talk about enough. You see, wrestling culture has always been about mental toughness. Push through the pain. Ignore the exhaustion. Don't complain, and for some athletes, this mindset becomes a trap. Burnout in sports is a trending topic in 2025, but wrestlers have been living it for decades. The season is long, the weight cuts are brutal, and injuries are practically a badge of honor. Knees taped up, shoulders dislocated, fingers bent in directions they're not supposed to go. Wrestlers fight through it because quitting isn't an option. But at what point does mental toughness just become untreated trauma? Let's paint a picture. You're 17 years old, standing in a dark gym hallway at 6 a.m. You haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Your body feels like it's shutting down, but you still have to warm up and face a kid who has been training just as hard as you. There's no music blaring, no roaring crowd, just fluorescent lights humming above you and the smell of sweat-soaked mats. This is the reality for thousands of young athletes across the country. They put their bodies on the line for a sport that doesn't even promise fame or fortune, just pride. And maybe a medal that doesn't even cover the gas money it took to get to the tournament. Parents sacrifice weekends and vacations to drive their kids to tournaments. Coaches dedicate their lives to building programs that barely get funded. And wrestlers give everything. They wrestle through sickness, through broken bones, through tears. And nobody sees the lonely nights in hotel rooms or the hours cutting weight in saunas. Wrestling is a grind that doesn't care. If you're tired, if you're injured, or if you're struggling mentally, it demands everything. And in today's world of instant gratification and viral fame, wrestling feels like a relic. It's old school, it's gritty, it's not built for clicks or followers. When an NBA player has a bad game, there's a media team explaining it. When a wrestler loses, it's on them, alone, one mistake, and their entire season can be over. The pressure is immense, especially at the amateur level, where scholarships, dreams, and future opportunities are on the line. This is where mental health in athletes becomes a conversation wrestling desperately needs. The rise of sports psychology, mindfulness training, and high-powered performance tools is changing how athletes approach competition, but wrestling culture is slow to adapt. Many wrestlers still see mental health struggles as weakness, and that's why so many suffer in silence. Burnout isn't just physical exhaustion, it's emotional collapse, and for a lot of wrestlers, by the time they graduate high school or college, they're done not just with wrestling, but with competition entirely. They're burnt out from years of pressure, injuries, and weight cuts. Yet, despite all this, wrestlers have a bond like no other. Ask anyone who's stepped on the mat, and they'll tell you this sport changes you. It teaches you resilience in ways other sports can't. It builds confidence, character, and an unshakable sense of grit. That's why so many wrestlers go on to become successful in other fields. They know what it's like to struggle, they know what it's like to suffer, and they know how to keep going when life gets hard. Wrestling is brutal, but it's also transformative. Still, the question remains, why does it suck to be a wrestler? Because this is a sport where the pain often outweighs the recognition. It's a sport that eats its athletes alive if they're not careful. And in today's era, where mental health is finally being prioritized, Wrestling is one of the last bastions of an old school, grinded-out mentality that sometimes does more harm than good. The mat is unforgiving, the schedule is punishing, the culture is intense, but for wrestlers, that's the point. Wrestling isn't supposed to be easy, it's supposed to test you, and in a strange way, that's what makes it beautiful. This sport is built on suffering, sacrifice, and relentless effort. Wrestlers don't chase glory, they chase growth. And that's why the rest of the world doesn't always understand them. But to truly understand wrestling, you have to see what goes on behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, wrestling isn't just a sport, it's a lifestyle. Wrestlers live and breathe this grind. The mat is their second home, and their weight class becomes a part of their identity. Every day revolves around practices, cutting weight, studying opponents, and recovering from the damage their bodies take. In 2025, we're seeing a surge in data-driven sports performance, where AI tools track every calorie burned, every heart rate spike, and every micro-injury. But wrestling is still raw. Most amateur wrestlers don't have million-dollar recovery programs. They're stretching on old mats, icing injuries with bags of frozen peas, and driving hours to face opponents who are just as hungry as they are. It's easy to romanticize the grind, but let's talk about the toll. There's the physical suffering. Sure, but there's also a social cost. Wrestlers miss parties, family gatherings, and holidays because the season runs through winter, and their commitment leaves little room for a social life. Friendships outside the sport often fade, and relationships can be strained because wrestling doesn't stop for birthdays or Christmas dinners. When your entire schedule revolves around practice and cutting weight, even something as simple as eating out with friends feels impossible. You're counting calories, sipping water slowly, and watching others enjoy what you've chosen to sacrifice. This isolation is something athletes across sports deal with, but wrestling amplifies it. A football player might have a bad day and still celebrate a team win. A basketball player can have an off game, but lean on their teammates. In wrestling, there's no safety net. Your win or loss is yours alone, and every moment on the mat is a reflection of your preparation. This pressure can be crushing, especially for younger wrestlers who are still figuring out who they are outside the sport. And let's not forget the injuries. Wrestling is brutal on the body. Knees, shoulders, and necks take constant punishment. Cauliflower ear becomes a badge of honor. But it's also a visible reminder of the physical damage wrestlers endure. Concussions happen, torn ACLs, dislocated elbows. Wrestlers fight through it because there's always another match, another tournament, another season. It's a cycle that feels endless. And unlike pro athletes with sponsorships and media coverage, amateur wrestlers often get nothing but a medal or a handshake for their efforts. Social media has changed the sports world, but not always for the better. In 2025, every athlete feels the weight of virality. One clip of you getting slammed or pinned can circulate online, turning your worst moment into a meme for wrestlers who are already fighting internal battles. This external pressure can be devastating. A bad match isn't just a bad day anymore, it's content. The mental resilience required to handle this level of scrutiny, combined with the already grueling demands of the sport, is staggering. Yet, here's what's fascinating. Despite all this suffering, wrestling keeps producing some of the toughest, most disciplined people in the world. The lessons learned on the mat carry over into every area of life. Wrestlers learn how to handle failure because they face it constantly. They learn how to push past limits because they're forced to every day. They learn how to get up after being literally thrown down. And while wrestling might not get the headlines of football or basketball, it's one of the most respected sports in every community where it exists. The culture of wrestling is built on respect. Respect for your opponent, respect for your coaches, respect for the grind. There's no trash talk in the middle of a match, no theatrics. Just athletes testing each other's skill and willpower. It's primal, almost ancient. Wrestling is one of the oldest sports in the world, and it still embodies that spirit of raw competition. Even in an era where sports are heavily commercialized, wrestling feels pure. But purity doesn't pay the bills. For many amateur wrestlers, there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. College wrestling scholarships exist, but they're limited, and even at the NCAA level, wrestling doesn't have the funding of other sports. After college, opportunities to keep wrestling competitively are rare unless you're aiming for the Olympics. For most, the sport ends when school does, and that's heartbreaking. Years of sacrifice and suffering for a journey that ends quietly, without the fanfare other athletes get. Still, if you ask wrestlers why they do it, they'll tell you it's because the mat teaches lessons nothing else can. Wrestling teaches you how to struggle. It teaches you how to handle fear, pain, and doubt. It teaches you that you are stronger than you think. This is why wrestling alumni thrive in MMA, business, military careers, and leadership roles. The sport hardens you, shapes you, and prepares you for life in ways few others can. But that doesn't erase the reality. Being a wrestler sucks. It sucks because the sport is unforgiving. It sucks because you're constantly tired, hungry, and sore. It sucks because it demands perfection while giving very little recognition in return. And yet, this suck is exactly why wrestlers are so respected. They walk through fire for something they love, something that shapes them into warriors in a world that often looks for shortcuts. Think about this. When was the last time you heard about a viral wrestling highlight? Unless you're deep in the community. Probably never, and that's what makes wrestling unique. It's not about the fame, it's about the fight. Wrestlers don't need a spotlight to validate their work. They find validation in the grind itself. That's why wrestling has survived centuries. It's not just a sport, it's a test of human will. In today's world, where instant results are celebrated and attention spans are shorter than ever, Wrestling remains a slow burn. Success isn't measured in likes or followers, it's measured in grit and sweat. In the moments when you want to quit but don't. And for every wrestler out there, this message rings true. Your journey matters even if the world isn't watching. To every parent who wakes up at 4 a.m. to drive their kid to a tournament. To every coach who spends countless hours building champions. To every wrestler cutting weight in a sauna. Right now your sacrifices are seen. Your journey is worth it. And yes, wrestling sucks. But maybe that's why it's beautiful. Because in that suffering, there's growth. In that grind, there's greatness. Wrestling isn't for everyone. It's a sport for those who are willing to embrace the pain, to face themselves, and to keep pushing no matter how heavy the weight feels on the scale or in life. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And that's why it matters. So, next time you see a wrestler step onto the mat, know that you're watching a story that started long before that match. You're seeing an athlete who has sacrificed more than most will ever understand. You're seeing someone who has learned how to fight, not just an opponent, but themselves. And that's why wrestling, for all its pain, will always be one of the most powerful sports in the world. If you've ever felt like the underdog, if you've ever had to fight for every inch in your life, wrestling is your story. And maybe, just maybe, it's time more people heard it. Smash that like button if you've ever rooted for an underdog. Which athlete inspires you the most? Drop their name in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe because we've got a wild story coming tomorrow that will change the way you see sports forever.